Hello and welcome to Module 1, an introduction to shares. This particular module has 6 topics and we're going to kick off with the first one. Our first topic in this module is understanding shares versus loans. So let's get started. So basically, what are shares? You can think of it as proof of ownership of part of a company. So if you imagine a big corporate, if you buy a share, you become a shareholder, and that means that you own part of that company. You own part of its equity. So you can hold 10 shares, 50 shares, 100 shares. So let's take an example and imagine a company has 100 shares and you buy 20 of those shares, then it makes you a 20% shareholder. So the number of shares that you buy also determines your percentage shareholding in the company or your percentage ownership in the company. So why do companies actually issue shares? Why would they want to sell a stake in their business to complete strangers? It's to raise money. So selling shares or selling equity is a way for companies to raise money, but it's not the only way. Another way, which you might be familiar with, is a loan. So a company can go to a bank to get a loan. So let's have a look at this illustration. You've got the bank, which is the lender. You've got the company, that's the borrower. And the company needs money now. So they go to the bank and the bank gives them cash. And when they have the cash, obviously in the future they would need to pay it back. And we know that borrowing is not free. So the cost of borrowing is the interest rate that the bank charges the company. So the company has to pay back the loan in the future with the interest payments. So that's another way for a company to raise money. A bank is not the only source of loans for a company. A company can also go to investors to get loans. So if we look at this example, if a company needs money now, they can go to investors to lend them money. And investors give them cash. And in return, the companies give the investors securities. Okay, so a security is, you can think of it as a catch-all phrase for financial markets instruments. So in this particular example, when we're talking about investor loans, let's look at a corporate bond. So a corporate bond is a vehicle or an instrument that a company can use to raise money from investors. A corporate bond is also known as a bearer instrument. So let's say a company wants to raise 1 million rands, and they would issue 1 million rand corporate bonds, and you'd get investors who would buy. So you can have one investor who buys the whole 1 million rand, or you can get a number of investors who buy certain denominations, but all totaling that 1 million rand. And each investor is going to get a bond, security, which proves that they are the holder of that particular bond. So similar to a bank loan, the company needs to pay back the investors the amount that the investors borrowed to the company. And also, similar to the interest that a company would pay the bank on a loan, for bondholders, companies pay what is called a coupon. So the interest rate on a bond is known as a coupon rate. And the interest payment on a bond is just referred to as a coupon. So that's just the financial market jargon, but the concept is basically the same. So if we look at this particular scenario, you've got a company that wanted cash from investors. Investors gave the company cash. The investors got a security in return. And what happens in the future? The investors receive the amount that they borrowed to the company, and they also receive interest payments. In the case of a bond, they would be called coupons. So the interesting thing about securities is investors, once they've bought a corporate bond, don't need to hold on to it until the maturity of that bond. They can actually trade it during the life of the bond. So if you are an investor and you buy a corporate bond, you don't have to hold on to it for 5 years if it's a 5-year corporate bond. You could sell it the very next day or the following week or any time during the maturity of the bond. And when you sell that security, you could sell it to other investors. And let's have a look at that. So you would sell it to a new investor, and then that bond then gets transferred to the new investor. And you, as the person who sold the bond, would receive money from the new investor. So then what happens then when the company needs to pay back the coupon or pay back the money that was borrowed from that bond? Well, let's have a look at what happens in the future. You have the original investors, but remember, they sold their bonds to a new investor. So what happens now is that the company pays the loan and the coupon to the new investor. It's pretty simple. And that brings us to the end of the first topic. And the next topic that we're going to look at is types of shares that you can invest in. So stay tuned.